Here's what I want you to think about. If every high-earning podcaster was once broke and probably operating their podcast at a loss, then truly, what is the difference between those who make millions now from their show and those who never make a dime? That is exactly what this episode is here to answer for you. I am back in the studio with my friend Danielle Hayden, who is the founder of Kickstart Accounting and the host of Business by the Books, and she is here to break down the numbers side of podcast growth. So if you have ever wondered, well, how do I track conversions from my podcast? How do I tell if my show is actually sending leads and sales into my business? Or is it time to reach out for sponsors? Or is it time to outsource or hire help? This episode is going to teach you exactly what you need to track, how to start measuring ROI from your show, and where to begin thinking about investing in order to get the biggest return from your podcast. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Danielle, welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, in the episode before this one, I love all of the questions that you have raised in all of our minds now. If you listen to that episode, then it's like, I'm sure your wheels are turning about, okay, how are you thinking about your podcast? And how are you thinking about the profitability of your podcast and what your podcast actually gives you as it relates to profit and maybe not, maybe the other ways that it serves you. And something that you mentioned, Danielle, in that episode that I love is this idea of putting the systems and tools and resources in place now for the person that you want to be a year from now, and for the business and for the podcast that you want to have a year from now. So for podcasters right now who are thinking, okay, I want my podcast to make me money, what do they need to start thinking about doing or planning for now in order for that outcome to actually happen? Because what I find is a lot of people will say, okay, I'm being consistent, I'm creating content, I'm putting episodes out there. When is this thing actually going to pay off?
So in order to look at the profitability of our podcast and our business, we have to look backwards. And looking backwards means completing the bookkeeping or having a bookkeeper complete the bookkeeping for you. The bookkeeping is just the act of, I like to picture it as you dump out 1,000-piece puzzle. There's a million puzzle pieces everywhere. And bookkeeping is putting all those puzzle pieces into this beautiful puzzle, so that you as the business owner can come in and look at the financial statements and have a visual representation of what just happened in your business. Now, regardless of whether or not your podcast is profitable, I want your business to have about 10 to 15% profitability after we pay you as the business owner. So if your business overall has a profit of 12% year to date or over the last 12 months, even if your podcast isn't profitable, your business is profitable and you have the dollars to continue to reinvest back into the business, and thinking about, even if your podcast isn't profitable, what else is your podcast doing for you? So we have this tool through bookkeeping and looking at our numbers that's going to help us see what just happened, where we can ask, what worked, what didn't work? What am I going to keep doing and what am I going to stop doing? Now, we talked a lot in the last episode about creating the vision for where we want to go. Bookkeeping is looking backwards. Now we have to look forward. And I like to look forward through a tool called budgeting. Now, don't everybody cringe and run. I am not telling you that you need to stop spending. We have been programmed to think, the minute we say budget, you're taking everything away from me. I don't want you to think of a budget that way. I want you to stand tall. I want you to think of a budget as a plan, permission to spend strategically so that you can guide this business to where you want to be in the future. And that means planning for the resources who are going to help you get to the next step.
Yeah. We don't often think about it this way, where it's like, okay, budget, immediate cringe. I don't want to have the budget. I'm going to be restricted, right? It feels restrictive and all this. And at the same time, just kind of shift that one little verbal shift into spending plan or plan for the future takes that restrictive pressure off And also, I really love what you said about thinking about your podcast in the greater ecosystem of what you're building. If you're building your podcast as a business of its own, it is one point of entry for revenue. Chances are there's other things that could also generate that revenue for you. If you have a business behind the podcast, there are other ways where that revenue is going to come in. Yes, your podcast can become a source of revenue, but I think what happens is we tend to think of our podcast more narrow-mindedly, where it's this one-to-one exchange. I'm going to pour in all of this time, and therefore this podcast now has to give me XYZ in terms of ROI in order for that time to be worth it. But really, Danielle, what you're inviting us to think about is, broaden up that perspective and think about what else is my podcast doing and what other roles is it playing that may increase profitability in other areas. So for someone who wants to understand how the numbers of their podcast equates to profit potential, or how they want to understand, the real ROI that they can expect to get from their podcast and when. What numbers actually matter and what should they be looking at and tracking month to month?
So we can look at quite a few different directions for each business and how you are receiving clients. So I don't want to give you one KPI, key performance indicator. So I want you to think about what numbers you have access to. Meaning, for every new client you bring in or product sold, are you getting the data for where they're coming from? So you could say, let's say I signed 5 new clients per month. You could say I spent $2,500 this month on the podcast divided by the 5 new clients that I signed. However, how many of them came from the podcast? Did 2 come from a referral? 1 came from a referral partner. And, we really only have 1 that can tie back from the podcast. So if that's the case, that 1 client cost you the $2,500 that month for the podcast. However, what is the lifetime value of that client? So if you signed 1 client in the $2,500 that you spent on the podcast, but that client pays you $5,000 a month and they tend to stick with you 6 to 12 months. Wow, that is an incredible ROI. So we really need to sit with the uncomfortability of looking at the numbers to know, where are my new customers coming from? Why are my existing customers staying with me? Does that tie back to the podcast at all? And what is actually driving my revenue? And how does my podcast serve my overarching business? I'm going to keep on saying this because I think it's really important for people to understand. Our overall net profit. So when we look at our income statement, sales minus cost of goods sold, minus all of your operating expenses. I'm getting a little accounting-y, but I'm doing it on purpose. After we've spent all of that money, that bottom line profit, we want that to be 10 to 15% of our sales. And that means we have a healthy, sustainable, profitable business. And so even if your podcast isn't delivering those clients, when it's part of the ecosystem of your business and we're still pulling in a profit, how else is your podcast serving the business as a whole?
This is such an important point, to think broader about the podcast. And I'm curious to know for your show, because you're a podcast host, and like you mentioned in the episode before this one, your podcast is not your number one client generator, but it's a niche podcast and it serves a lot of different roles in your business. Are you guys tracking attribution from the podcast? And if so, how are you tracking that? And how do you tie, okay, X new client just joined and enrolled into our services, and here's how we're tying that back to the podcast?
Yeah. So we track for every single new client when they sign up to engage in services with us, they're putting on our form where they heard from us. So if they put in that they heard from us on Business by the Books, then we attribute that client to the podcast. And then we are looking monthly at how many new clients we signed from the podcast and what is the value for the month and what's the 12-month lifetime value of that client. Now, I'll be honest with you. Most of our clients don't come from our podcast. They really don't. I get actually really excited when I see our podcast on there. But I know that our podcast is able to continue to serve It is serving our existing clients and giving them information every single week on how to use your numbers to manage your business. And it's a resource for my team. And so when I look at the profitability, I'm not just looking at the profitability of the podcast. I really don't spend very much time there. I look at the profitability of the company and the overall cost of dollars being spent in advertising and marketing. Did you know that if your goal for this year is to grow your business, that we want to be spending between 8 and 10% of our sales on sales and marketing, which includes your podcast? If you're only spending 3% of your sales in marketing, and then you're like, oh, Danielle, I did not hit my goals again. Well, I can tell you why. Now, you might be in a season where you're spending 15 to 25% of your sales in marketing costs in a season where you're getting your podcast off the ground. You're really investing in podcast guesting, having someone pitch for you, running some paid ads, revamping your website. There's going to be seasons where the amount is higher. However, consistently, if we want to grow this business, your podcast is part of your marketing dollars, and it is okay to spend money in marketing your business.
This brings up a really important question, Danielle, because let's say, because we've talked about a few different things, right? We're creating this spending plan in order for the podcast to grow, in order for the business to grow. We want that growth. That's where we want to be a year from now. Let's say right now in this moment, someone's deciding between investing in ads for the podcast or outsourcing the editing to buy back their time, or maybe hiring a coach or a strategist to help them see where the lowest hanging opportunities are to help the podcast generate more leads, more sales, so on and so forth. What would you recommend to someone to make that spending decision from a place of strategy and not from a place of fear or scarcity?
I would say build a budget first. Take your financials, take the uncomfortable time. And I know it's not easy. There are people out there who want to help, but sit down and strategically map out your spending for the next 12 months. We have this innate fear where we use words like, air quote, I can't afford it. I don't know if I can afford it. I'm not good with money. I'm not a money person. I'm not good with numbers. And so we use it as this dismissive behavior. And this, as a podcast host, as a CEO of a business, you need to take responsibility for those decisions. And building a budget is going to allow you to map out your revenue and then exactly who you want to hire. And then you can kind of play, like, once you get comfortable with the budget, it can be really a fun tool for you. So you can insert one, like, okay, I'm going to hire all three. Oh, that doesn't look so good. All right, let me take one out. Now I'm going to hire just two. So build the budget. And if it's okay, I do have a template everybody can download, because I don't want you to think that I'm just saying go build a budget and not giving you guys all a resource.
You read my mind. That was going to be my next question. And if someone needs help with building this budget because we don't know our numbers, we have no idea where to start, Danielle, what do we need to do next?
Yeah. So go to kickstartaccountinginc.com/budget and you can download our template. So this is the template that we use with our clients. Go download it, use it as a free resource. It's a gift for you guys. So it's kickstartaccountinginc.com/budget. If you're like, Danielle, I cannot do this on my own. This is something that we do for our clients. I do get it. Money is not easy. And so we love to do budgets for our clients. And then if you're ready to really look into the future with specialized KPIs, we do have our CFO services as well.
I'm curious, when someone has this budget/plan in place, because I think my brain likes that word better, but when someone has that in place and they know their numbers and they're feeling good about their numbers and they're feeling confident in their numbers, even if the numbers aren't necessarily where they want them to be, they will have that clarity, which, if I know for me, has brought about a lot of confidence. How does that change the way that they show up in how they approach their podcast and how they host their podcast and how they might market or pitch or ask someone to be on their show? What's the ripple effect that creates?
Okay. So I had this client who came to me a few years ago, Jenna, and she said to me, Danielle, I want you to teach me how to run my business at a loss. And I was like, weird request, but sure, I'll take it. So we did what we call a catch up. So it was like November when she came to us. And so we pulled all of her transactions into QuickBooks. We got everything cleaned up and we had our financial review call with her. And I said, Jenna, I got good news and bad news. The good news is that I don't have to teach you how to run your business at a loss. The bad news is that it's November and we don't have enough time to make any plans to save for taxes. Now, here's what happened is that Jenna had considered herself a freelancer and that she was kind of doing this thing on the side. And so she was commingling business and personal expenses. Once we pulled out the personal expenses and got a true picture of what her business performance was, what the sales, what the expenses were, she was shocked at how well her business was doing, how profitable she was doing. Okay, here's the coolest part. Jenna's entire mindset shifted. She's like, I'm not a freelancer. I'm running a business. I'm the CEO of this. She invested money in her marketing. I mean, I saw her at every single conference and in-person events, and she hired a coach. And there was just this beautiful ripple effect where she had the confidence to spend money in her business. Now, we watched her revenue grow from her investment in marketing. In the second year, she started to stabilize that out and she shifted her spending so that she could take home more money personally. She ended up buying herself a home because she was able to continue that growth. She's like, I am a CEO of this business. I deserve to be paid as such. So she purchased her home. She's built this beautiful team now. And this is just one client, right? Like I've watched hundreds of people transform like this over the last 10 years, where knowing their numbers gave them the confidence to pay themselves what they deserve, the confidence to hire new team members, to start to build a community, to say, I'm worth this revenue. I'm worth these dollars. I can increase my prices. I mean, it's just this beautiful trickle-down approach.
Oh, I love that. And I know it's done that for me. And honestly, every quarter, you guys send me a snapshot. I'm like, I don't want to look at it. And then I look at it and I'm like, oh, it's not so bad. It's not as bad as I thought. Phew, okay, we can live another day. We can fight another day. And, it's one of those things where for whatever reason, like you mentioned, we all have this innate like resistance to the numbers, which often comes back from the money stories, from our upbringing, our life's experiences, and so on and so forth. And you can change the story. And I appreciate you being here to remind us of that today, Danielle. So thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for helping us to just broaden our perspectives when it comes to the podcast. Whether you are podcasting with a business behind it and your intention is for that podcast to help impact the business positively in some way, or whether you are podcasting as a business. And ultimately, you got to have that mindset and that approach and going into and thinking about it this way and thinking about it being the CEO of your podcast. So thank you for letting us tap into all of your wisdom.
Of course. Everyone take off your superhero capes, accept the help from this podcast and others out there who want to be a resource for you as you build your journey.
And if you found this episode helpful, then I would love it if you would just take a second and tap the 5 stars on Apple or on Spotify, and bonus points when you write a written review on Apple. Because what this does is it lets other listeners know out there right now who are about to launch a podcast or who are struggling to grow their podcast. It lets them know that this show will help them and that it will be worth their time. And then stay right where you are, because we both know that in order to make money from your podcast, you have to give a call to action. But in order for people to take action on your call to action, well, obviously it needs to be a natural next step for them. But what most people don't consider is that your listeners actually have to hear that call to action in order to take action on it. So in the next episode, I'm going to help you figure out exactly where you should be placing your call to action inside your episodes so that you can increase the chances of more listeners hearing it, increase your listener retention as a whole, and get more listeners binging your episodes every single week. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.